4D RPG online game, Legend World, an exciting fantasy world of virtual reality, 50 million users worldwide. The bright afternoon sun shone over the skyscrapers of Seoul. 21st century, first century, VR online game, Legend World, has been released. Along the road there were many houses with red roofs. Although the monthly maintenance fee is over 300,000 won, this system has gained explosive popularity around the world as it provides huge equipment for rent. A large capsule stood in someone's room. The game became so popular that there was even a profession for people involved in buying and selling quests and artifacts. A guy with light stubble on his chin sat inside the capsule with a smile. They were called dark gamers. The guy put his VR headset on his face. He thought that he was just one of them. He stood in the game with an enthusiastic smile. On the dialogue box was his stats box. Yak, level 131, profession, crazy berserker, human, warrior of madness, no affiliation. He raised the paper scroll above his head with a shout. Falling to his knees, Yak shouted joyfully that he had finally found the quest item. Pressing the paper to his face, he said that for 2 months he had been eating instant noodles, and now he had finally found it. Straightening up, he said that after receiving the reward, the first thing to do was buy rice. The sky turned evening orange and Yak said he needed to pay his rent first. With one hand in his pocket, he walked down the street, wondering how much money he could get. The main character exhaled heavily, turning pale with fatigue. The guy with the cane and the green hat turned around and asked what happened. The system reported receiving 100 units of reputation, 5 units of wisdom, leveling up, and receiving the title Magic Weapon Hunter. Several subsequent alerts reported increasing levels. On the dialogue box in front of the main character it was written, "You received the quest, find Fance." Yak asked in shock what this was all about. Looking at the white boots on the ground, he asked if these boots weren't worn at level 50. The guy in the hat, closing his eyes, asked if he would take it. Yak fussily grabbed his boots. The dialogue box says, "Rogue Wings, boots made from the skin of a white wyvern, also called the Lord of the Sky. Skills, triple jump, +5 to movement speed." The main character thought that even if he put it up for sale on Item Trade, he would get no more than 1 million won. Item Trade, trading platform for buying and selling. The guy in the hat nervously looked away and Yak wondered if that meant he only made 1 million won in 2 months. He thought that if he paid off his rent arrears, he would only have 200,000 won left. Approaching the guy, he looked at him intently, and the guy, without looking at him back, asked what he was doing. Grabbing him by the collar, the main character shouted that he should have initially said what his reward was for the quest. The guy asked if he didn't know that there was a random reward for completing a secret quest. Gritting his teeth, Yak burned with anger. Raising his finger, the guy asked if he knew what would happen if you used force on an NPC. People in tall hats and red clothes, armed with clubs, began to rush towards them. Closing his eyes, Yak smiled nervously and cursed, realizing that he had completely forgotten that he was in the game due to problems in real life. He found himself behind bars, and a red dialogue box informed him that he had been sentenced to 60 minutes for attacking an NPC. Behind the steel bars, the full moon was shining in the sky, and the main character lay down on the floor, putting his hands on his head, and asked what he should do for an hour. He lifted the VR headset from his eyes in real life, cursing in displeasure. Looking at the keyboard and the blue screen in front of him, he wondered what he should do now. The main character began to drink from the bottle and, pressing keys on the keyboard, said that he needed to check the current price. The item trade website was opened on his screen. He entered the name of the item into the search bar, Robber Wings. Looking at the search result, he exclaimed happily that the item was worth 1 million won a few days ago. Smiling, the main character said that he did not have time to think, and he needed to sell it immediately. Stretching, he sighed and said that he should have just gone hunting, because he would have earned 1.5 million won a month by collecting and selling various items. But he wanted to grab a big jackpot at once. Seeing something, he opened his eyes wide and asked in amazement that there was such an item in the game. The image showed a huge stone creature standing under the night sky. The product information says that it is the Crescent Moon Giant. The price is 300 million won. Detailed description: ancient magical weapon. Similar to the crescent shape, the weapon is thin and sharp. At night, when the crescent moon is shining in the sky, the weapon has incredible power that even strong opponents cannot cope with. Rubbing his chin, Yak said that this is a soul rank that is much higher than unique, and he can't believe that its value is only 300 million won. He added that he still couldn't afford something like that. The system notified him that his prison time was over. The main character asked in amazement that an hour had already passed. Putting on the VR headset, he said it was time to get back into the game. he again found himself in the night gaming city. Blacksmith Fance, standing in the forge with a hammer, asked if he had completed the quest and what about the durability of his weapon. Taking a sip from his mug, Yak frowned and told him not to even ask about it. He said they all said hidden quests were cool. He got a pathetic item as a reward. Fance told him not to act like he didn't know what he was getting. He told him to wait a little, because he would finish the repair quickly, but the amount for the repair would be rather large. Raising his palm while sitting at the table, the main character asked him to just do a good job. He added that he could do him a favor and increase the maximum strength. Fance asked if he knew that he needed to accept the quest chain from him. He hit the steel with a hammer, and the main character, twitching, asked about the quest chain. He remembered the dialogue box with the quest activation. He said that he didn't pay attention because he was too angry with Teddy. Holding up his shiny breastplate, Fance said that he was quite interested in ancient weapons that were created long ago during the era of magic. He said, especially the golem. Imagining the crescent moon giant striking the ground with force, he said that right now the entire kingdom was trying to create a golem, and if he brought him the basic components to create a golem, he would reward him accordingly. A dialogue box appeared in front of the main character, activated Quest Fance's request for the strongest weapon from the age of magic. Additional restrictions: from the moment the quest is activated, the cost of repairing and purchasing items increases 3 times until the quest is completed. Putting his hand on the table, Yak asked if he was sure that he wasn't going to give him something that cost 100 gold like Teddy did. Fance said he can't say that yet, but he can tell him it will be worth it. Scratching his head, Yak thought he was a typical NPC. He asked what it looked like. Holding up his little finger, Fance said it was about that size, and as far as he remembered, it was made of a shiny black material. The main character asked in shock if this was all and where it was. Placing the breastplate on the table, Fance said that he had heard that it was somewhere inside Didnt Castle. He said that, in any case, he would reward him generously if he brought it back, and if he was lucky, the search would not take long. Yak went outside and opened the system interface. The dialogue box says, "This is a forced quest, so you are allowed to act freely during the process. The difficulty is unknown, the reward is unknown." Yak thoughtfully said that he should keep this on his quest list until he completes it. Looking at the castle on the horizon, he asked what choice he had. He said that he had better go to Didnt Castle right now. The stars sparkled above the trees, and the protagonist asked what if it took 2 months again. He said it looked like he'd have to hunt for trash along the way. The sun sparkled over the huge stone gates. The main character approached it and noticed something. The city was surrounded by stone walls, and he said that he knew that this place was huge, but finding something so small here would not be easy. Didnt, a remote city in Legend World. The noise of everyday life could be heard from the city under the bright sun. The guards at the gate told the protagonist that he could pass through. Yak thanked them. He stepped inside, walking down a street full of people and shielding his face from the sunlight with his palm. He asked how he would find something so small in such a place. A shoe shiner, plying his trade, asked about an object the size of a little finger, made of a shiny black material. He said that he had never seen anything like it except shoe polish. The merchant said he had no idea what he was talking about. He was told that there was nothing like it here. The guard, rubbing his chin, turned around and asked if he was a citizen of this city, because outsiders must fill out a report of entry at the city hall. The boy, raising his hand, shouted that he had heard a rumor about it. The girl asked if Fance asked him to get it. The boy said that he heard that this is the heart of the legendary weapon. A man in purple clothing and a magic hat, rubbing his long gray beard, asked if he was talking about the black object that Fance had asked for. He said that if he wanted to find it, it must not be an ordinary object. Yak approached the counter and asked if he knew where it was or where it could be. He added that he had been searching all day. The old man began rubbing his beard again and said that he did not know where this object was, but the torn-winged fairy's stream is beyond the castle's northern gates. He said there are several rumors floating around that valuable items may be found there. The main character, with sparkling eyes, asked if it was true. The old man asked what was wrong with him. Yak asked where exactly this place was. The old man, pointing with his finger, sighed and said that he would mark this place on his map so that he could find it. The main character bowed gratefully several times. The old man said in confusion that he was a rather polite guy. With a determined frown, Yak thought that he couldn't spend several months on this quest, because if he didn't earn enough money for the next few months, he would have to stop being a dark gamer. The guards blocked his way with their spears, and he exclaimed in fear. The left guard said he could go further than that. The right guard said that the northern region is dangerous, so entry there without a command is prohibited. The main character said that he had done XP farming before. He asked them to just let him through. The right guard said threateningly that they had already told him that going outside was prohibited. The left guard asked if he wanted to be locked in the dungeon. Turning around, Yak obeyed and waved his hand. The guard added that all outsiders must fill out a report of entry at the city hall. Drawing with a stick in the sand, the main character asked how long he would have to wait like this. Leaving towards the sunset, he said that for now he would wait until they switch guards. Sighing in his gaming capsule, the main character said that he was tired. Opening a can of soda, he thought that he needed to complete this quest as soon as possible. He began to drink in large gulps and thought that, after all, he was not the only one who had received this quest. Typing on the keyboard, he asked if there was a guide somewhere. Yak entered the name of the quest into the search, but it did not return any results. Sweating nervously, he entered search queries one after another and came to the conclusion that there was not a single piece of information on this topic. He wondered if he was the only one who received this quest. Frowning, he wondered how this could be possible. A thought flashed in his head. The main character sat back and thought that this meant either that he was the only person who received this quest, or that he was the only one who could receive the reward. He thought that if he made the right decisions, he could hit the jackpot. Breathing heavily, Yak said that he will complete this quest as quickly as possible, no matter what. He said he would do it first. He climbed up the stone wall of the city behind the guard. He began to tiptoe behind the guards. The main character jumped forward, which attracted the attention of the guards, who immediately turned around. They ran towards him and shouted at him to stop. Yak jumped off the wall and the guards ordered the intruder to be arrested. Upon landing, he found himself surrounded by a crowd of guards. With his mouth wide open, he began to quickly run away from his pursuers. The guards ran through the forest, blowing their whistles and shouting at him to stop. Sitting on a tree branch, the main character mentally told them to stop chasing him, because he would rather die than surrender to prison. Looking at the guards who had lost sight of him, he asked why they were so persistent, since they were simple NPCs. After some time, he jumped from the tree to the ground. Brushing the dust off his hands, he sighed and said that he had finally broken away from them. Soon Yak arrived at Torn-Winged Fairy's Stream, north of Didnt Castle. He stood next to a wooden sign. Looking at the sign, he said that this was a notification for a repeatable quest. It says, "Repeatable quest. This is where greedy fairies stored the goods they stole from people. They incurred the wrath of the gods and had their wings torn. If you hunt 30 fairies near this stream, I shall reward you, captain of the Didnt Guards." A sword appeared in the protagonist's hand and he said that he should look for the fan's item while he completed this quest. Lines of bright energy sparkled in the air. These lines were left in the air by the protagonist's sword, with which he destroyed winged monsters. Around him, dry hands with sharp claws appeared from the ground. Raising his foot, surrounded by monsters, Yak said that there was no end to them. Opening his mouth, he swung his sword. Swinging his sword, he quickly cut down several fairies. The system reported receiving 2 teeth of the Torn-Winged Fairy, helmet of the Forgotten Knight, Lady Ruby's necklace. Turning around, the main character asked how many items they stole from people. The system again reported the receipt of a fairy tooth. The energy from his attack sparkled among the trees. The morning sun began to rise from behind the mountains. Yak was breathing heavily, leaning on his sword. Surrounded by the corpses of monsters, he said that there were indeed too many of them. Looking at the dialogue box, he said his inventory was full. Throwing away the items one by one, he said they were useless. Suddenly, the main character noticed a small black object that looked like a stone. The dialogue box says, "A mysterious heart. Quest reward cannot be transferred." The main character remembered the boy who said that he heard that this was the heart of the legendary weapon. He happily picked up the object, placing it in his palm. He started jumping for joy, shouting that he had finally found it. Then he did not even suspect that his parenting diary was about to begin. On the screen there was a screensaver in the style of a TV show, going from rags to riches with Legend World. Yak's parenting diary. Yak's real name, Seo Yeonwoo, was on the screen. He said that he was very happy when he found the heart. Darkening, he said that this was before he gave it to Fance. Raising his palm, he frowned and said that after he did this, his joy turned to disappointment. Smiling awkwardly, he scratched his head and said that then he didn't even suspect that he had hit the jackpot. The afternoon sun was shining over the small stone house, and birdsong could be heard. The main character tapped his finger on the table with displeasure. Fance studied the black object with an optical instrument while sitting at the table opposite him. Yak continued to tap his finger on the table. Fance furrowed his gray eyebrows thoughtfully. Hitting the table with his hands, the main character loudly asked how long he was going to look at it. Fance jumped in fright. Pointing his finger at the item, Yak told him if he didn't know what to do with it, Just mark his quest complete and give him another reward. He told him to also return the stone to him. Shielding the stone from him, Fance said that he was too impatient for a young man. Rising from his chair, he said that it was an object created using ancient magic, something they could not understand using modern technology. He asked if it wasn't obvious that he would want to admire something like that. The main character asked with an irritated cry whether he really didn't even study it, but simply admired it all this time. Fance laughed in response. Picking up the object, he asked if he really didn't know what it was. Yak said with a blank stare that he really didn't know. Throwing a stone into the fire, Fance said that it was a subject beyond their understanding. The main character asked in shock what he was doing. The stone lay among the flames, and Fance said that it could be said to be an amalgamation of ancient magical techniques and casting skills. He said that according to the Baliki Kavak, a document passed between them, the blacksmiths, this object can only reveal its true value when it is engulfed in flames. The main character shouted angrily that he did not know whether it was Baliki Kavak or Belly Dancer Kavako. He demanded that he remove the object from the flames this very minute. Laughing, Fance put the pliers on his shoulder and said he was a really impatient guy. He took the item out of the oven. He placed a black cube with red lines on the saucer. Yak asked what it was. Putting the plate on the table, Fance told him to touch it, because it was not hot at all. Touching the cube, the main character exclaimed that it was really not hotter. He asked if it was some kind of magical object. The system reported receiving a mysterious opaque cube as a quest reward. Fance said with a warm motherly smile that the cube now belonged to him. The main character told him not to smile like that in front of the guy. He added that he can't even hit him because he's an NPC. He opened the door and Fance waved goodbye. The bright rays of the sun shone on the road leading through the forest. The main character put the cube on the ground, lost in thought. Taking the cube in his hand, he asked what he should do with it. He said that perhaps he should have asked what was written about this subject in this document, the name of which he had already forgotten. Closing his eyes, he tried to use the search engine to find information about the cube and document, but the search yielded no results. Picking up the cube from the ground, he apologized and asked what he was supposed to do with it, and wasn't it just another useless item? Sighing, he asked how he could use it since he couldn't even sell it because it was an heirloom item. Suddenly the cube began to glow a bright red light and his mouth fell open in shock. It began to spin and fall apart. Yak exclaimed that it was turning into something. The object sparkled with bright red energy. A sphere of red energy was spinning like a whirlwind above the main character. A skull and a small hand were visible among the red sparks. The main character opened his eyes wide in shock. A small creature stood in front of him, shrouded in bolts of red energy. The main character was not impressed and his face showed disappointment. Looking at the creature, he asked what this thing was. The creature happily began to run around in a circle, and Yak, clutching his head, asked what was wrong with his luck lately. He put his hand on the creature's head in confusion. The creature stroked his knee in response. The dialogue box says, "The mysterious cube was unlocked when the being inside it accepted you as its master. It has been sleeping for a long time." The main character read the contents of the notification in amazement. The dialogue box says, "You have become the master of ancient magical weapon, Gigant's Dark." He exclaimed joyfully. Recalling what he saw on the website, he asked if it was the one that cost 300 million won. Yak lifted the creature in front of him. Spinning joyfully and throwing it into the air, he exclaimed that he had hit the jackpot and was now rich. Stopping, he said that Gigant's Crescent cost 300 million, and this is Gigant's Dark. Opening the game interface, he said that he needed to check. The dialogue box says, "Gigant's Dark." Everything about this item is veiled in darkness just like its name. Not much is expected from it in its current state. Rank, Normal, Level 1. Characteristics unknown. Cannot be sold or transferred to anyone else. Reading individual lines of the description, Yak asked in shock what it was. Looking at the creature, he thought that it was useless in its current state, and he could not even sell or transfer it. The creature pointed its finger at the hare standing on the road. It jumped in pursuit, and the hare began to run away in horror. The main character thought that even if he sent an email to a Legend World employee, he would not receive a response, because they are famous for not responding to messages unless it is related to a bug or account problem. Looking at the creature running after the beast, he thought that its name had Gigants in it, so it must be useful for something. Closing his eyes, he grinned and thought that for now he needed to raise his level, and this would be his first step. Forest of Verdant Flora Hunting Zone, Level 20. A column of smoke rose above the trees. Several monsters that looked like humanoid beasts were eating meat around the fire. The blue wolf was roasting a whole rabbit carcass over a fire. Legs shrouded in red energy appeared in front of them. Pointing his finger forward, Yak told the creature that it was time to show him what he could do. The creature rushed to attack. The monsters, coming out of their huts, turned towards the fight. The creature's eyes glowed red under the skull on its head, and the main character thought that it looked eager to fight. Closing his eyes, he smiled and thought, at least it'll live up to the name of Gigants. Gigants leapt to attack, and Yak's eyes widened in anticipation. The blue wolf turned his head in their direction. Shrouded in a red aura, Gigants approached him, and the monster shouted that it was an intruder. The other two monsters turned in his direction, asking who would dare. The monster's face became covered in nervous sweat. Gigant slammed the full weight of his small body into the monster's face. The system reported that Gigants learned body slam, and the main character joyfully raised his fist in the air. In an interview on the TV show, a frustrated Yak parent said he suddenly had a strange feeling, like something was wrong. The monsters silently looked at Gigants, who smugly spread his legs wide. It kicked the blue wolf in the leg, which did no damage. He calmly rose to his feet. The monster towered over Gigants, looking at him with a menacing gaze. The wolf waved his leg, kicking the Gigants forcefully to the side. He angrily asked what this thing was. Looking at the creature flying in the air, the other monsters asked who it was, because they had never seen anything like it. The monster with the pig's snout suggested trampling it well. They began to beat the Gigants, and the main character, extending his hand forward, called out to them. He loudly shouted for them to stop. Above the monster village, the screams of its inhabitants were heard along with the roar of a fight. Picking up Gigants, Yak asked if it was okay. He thought that it was heavier than it seemed. Behind him, beaten monsters lay on the ground. Gigants made a sound in response, and the protagonist smiled nervously and said that he didn't know whether he was saying it hurt or that it didn't hurt. Suddenly the creature fell asleep, and Yak asked in amazement if a level 20 dungeon would be too difficult. Looking up, he said that even Gigants probably couldn't handle a level 20 dungeon on the first level. Gigants was sleeping and snoring, and Yak thought that he should take it to an easier hunting zone. Earthworm hunting zone, level 15. Gigants raised his palm in fear, surrounded by insect monsters. Gentle field, buffalo hunting zone, level 10. A regular bull lifted Gigants off the ground, who was flailing his arms and legs helplessly. Rotane fox hunting zone, level 5. Two little foxes studied the confused Gigants, placing him on a pile of hay. Yak clenched his teeth in anger. Yoka Plains rabbit hunting zone, level 1. Gigants tripped and fell on the grass in front of the defenseless rabbits. The main character desperately fell to the ground. Enraged, he shouted and asked if he couldn't defeat even a level 1 monster on his own. What should he do? Without finishing his sentence, he gritted his teeth and thought that he felt like a terrible adult for swearing at a child. Stomping his foot on the ground in irritation, he asked if it realized how hard he had worked for this, and it was absolutely useless. Sitting down on the grass, Yak scratched his head, looked at Gigants and asked what he should do with it now. He lay down on the grass and said that he couldn't sell or throw it away, and there was no information on the internet about how to grow or use it. Covering his face with his palm, he sighed heavily and said that he was giving up. Opening the game interface, he told the creature to remain in his inventory for now. Gigants' face disappeared along with the dialogue box, and the main character said that he was sure that a guide on what to grow or use it should appear soon. Getting up from the grass, he said that he didn't earn any money from this quest, so he needs to do XP farming. Rebels Territory, Knights of the Tot Resistance Army Hunting Zone, level 150. Knights in dark armor were wiping their blades. One of them asked what was for dinner today. Another, rubbing his chin, said that it was probably a rabbit, as usual. The first knight said that he was already tired of rabbits. The main character stood on the edge of a cliff. Flexing his wrists, he said that he had arrived and now it was time to earn money. He jumped off the cliff with a confident grin. As he landed, he raised a small cloud of dust from the ground. Turning around, the knights exclaimed that this was an intruder. The knight on the watchtower began to ring the bell loudly, raising the alarm. An armed crowd of knights ran to attack. Shrouded in a red aura, Yak took a fighting stance. The dialogue box says, the skill Gore Engraver will be activated. Effective for 300 seconds. Attack speed plus 30%. Movement speed plus 20%. Minus 5% stamina every 10 seconds. Smiling, the main character said, let's go. Swinging his sword, he jumped towards the crowd of knights. Red energy swirled around him, and he screamed loudly, brow furrowed. A loud sound echoed over the rocks, behind which high mountain peaks were visible. Having made a revolution around its axis, Yak cut the knights back with his sword. Blocking the attack on one side, he punched the other knight. Running through the enemy ranks, he threw knights into the air with his blows. The sun was shining in the blue sky. The main character stood among the fallen knights, placing his sword on his shoulder. Shrouded in a thick red aura, he turned around and asked what he had received. The dialogue box says, 42 Rebels badges. A badge that proves you have defeated a rebel. You can exchange it for a small reward once you take it to the castle. 35 Rebels bundles, unopened. Once you open it, you can acquire all sorts of treasures the rebels have gathered. The contents are a mystery until you open it. Yak said that he earned 1 day's worth of money. Looking towards the sunset, he said that he needed to organize his inventory somewhere in the village before the mobs respawn. He said he was tired. The noisy street was full of people going about their business. A big fat guy was sleeping on a chair with meat and a large mug in his hands. Approaching the door, the main character saw an elderly woman stirring a large pot of soup. He said with a smile that the place was bustling with life even though it was night, and that must be because it was a big city. He entered the item shop. Yak dumped a bunch of different items onto the counter. The seller in the monocle calmly looked at the items. The main character put the bags on the counter and said that he had even more bundles and he wanted to sell them all. Looking at the item through a monocle, the seller asked if it was a Rebel's badge. The main character took out several large bags from his inventory and said that he wanted to sell all of this too. The seller apologized and said that most of these items were trash, among which there might only be a couple of gems. He placed 5 gold coins on the counter. Yak angrily shouted that he had spent 5 days living in the Resistance Army's mountain division for these badges. He demanded to give him more. Raising his palms up, the seller said in confusion that they have been receiving a lot of garbage from rebels lately, and he can't do anything when there's so much supply. Yak asked in amazement why he was getting so many items from level 150 monsters. The seller asked if he knew. He pointed his finger at the poster on the wall. The poster says, looking for warriors who will defeat the Tot Resistance Army. The royal family will bestow a reward based on performance. The seller said that crowds of players come here to find the Tot Resistance Army scattered everywhere for this purpose. Holding a handful of badges in his palm, he said that's why items like these badges are basically worthless right now. As he walked away and rubbed his chin, the main character thought about the reward from the royal family. Opening the almost empty bag of coins, he once again spoke thoughtfully about the reward from the royal family. There was a full moon in the sky and he thought that this meant that it would be worth a lot of gold and he would be able to get additional quests if he gained more experience. He thought he should do this instead. There was a deep blue night sky over the city at night, and he thought that he had wasted too much of his precious time on strange quests. A man in light armor appeared in front of the main character. Standing in a tent, he asked if he wanted to take part in the plan to conquer the Tot Resistance Army. Yak, straightening up, said loudly yes, and he will try. Handing him a red cape, the knight said that he would hire him as a mercenary of the Royal Knights. He told him to wear this cape to show that he was a mercenary. The main character looked enthusiastically at the red cape. He put it on his back, and it fluttered in the wind. The knight, clinking his armor, said that they, the Royal Knights, are fighting for the honor of the kingdom, including Didnt Castle. He loudly told him to go and fight, and he commends him for his courage. White clouds floated across the sky above the trees, and birdsong could be heard. Among the rocks there were military tents and an observation tower. Standing on the edge of the cliff, the main character said that he would set up his temporary camp here. He said that he would need it if he wanted to do some proper XP farming. After some time, there was a tent with a primitive bed on the edge of the cliff. Yak exclaimed happily that this was a bed he could rest on. He then turned his attention to a small warehouse in which he can store all his trash items. Looking at the boiling cauldron, he said that this was a cooking station where he could get buffs from food. With his palms folded, the protagonist said that it looked good, and now it was time to get down to business. First day, the main character destroyed the knights in dark armor with light swings of his sword. Second day, Yak set fire to the knights' tents with a torch, and they began to run away in horror. The third day, he cut the watchtower in half with a swing of his sword. The main character contentedly placed the huge bag on the ground. Sitting on the bed, he said with a smile that this should provide him with money. Looking at the dialogue box, he said that he needed to remove trash items from the warehouse. He noticed something and his face broke out in a cold sweat. He said it was strange. He asked why he had done so much farming and yet he still hadn't leveled up. His level was still 135. Yak shouted that Knight of the Tot Resistance Army is a high-level zone for him, and this is all he got from XP farming for the past few days. A fire was crackling next to his tent, and he wondered what was happening, and whether this was a special condition for this quest. He noticed the Gigant's icon on the dialogue box. A sleepy Gigant appeared in front of him, shrouded in a blue aura. Looking at the dialogue box, he choked in shock. On the dialogue box it was written that his level had risen to 15. The main character asked why it was level 15, because he didn't take it out of his inventory. His mouth widened. He wondered if they were sharing experience points even when it was in his inventory. Gigants looked at him blankly, and Yak sighed and said that he couldn't believe it was still using experience points without doing anything. Gigants touched his knee. The main character looked back at him. Gigants looked at him with big shining eyes, and Yak mentally asked him not to look at him like that. The wind blew and the wolves howled at the full moon. The wood in the fire crackled. The protagonist's tent stood on the edge of a cliff under the moonlight. Gigants pulled the edge of the bag with his hands, looking irritably at it. The main character thought that he couldn't understand how to use it, because it couldn't even help with looting from the mobs. There was a small wooden branch in the bag. Gigant started swinging the stick, and Yak thought that it couldn't even perform basic pet functions, but he couldn't just throw it away. Sighing, he thought, is this a command to recreate from scratch? Dark threw away the branch and began to dig into the bag. He dived inside the bag, and the main character asked that it was all garbage. Dark, with an exclamation, raised a shield with a shiny stone in the middle over the bag. The dialogue box says, Dark obtained Tot's small shield from the rebels. Smiling awkwardly, the main character asked if it was that good. He added that even if he sold it, they would not earn a single coin. Dark took a fighting stance, armed with a shield and a branch. The main character told him to just play with it and he looks like a Spartan warrior. He lay down on the bed with his hands under his head and told him to do what he wanted, and if he ran away and became independent, it would be even better. The sun was shining brightly in the sky. Looking at the map on the dialogue box, the chief asked where they would go today. Walking along the road, he said that he used forward base in the mountain chalet once, so next is the command center. He said that there should be a rebel leader, Maximos, and if he goes there at his current level, he will not be able to deal damage and will die. He said that if he kept killing monsters in the mountain chalet and the forward base, it wouldn't help his progress. Rubbing his chin, Yak said that he should hunt Maximos instead of just attracting his aggression. Dark raised his palm. He grabbed the main character by the leg, and he asked what happened and didn't he run away. Dark looked at him with wet, shiny eyes. Yak told him to go to the inventory first because he needed to complete the quest first. Dark waved his fists in his inventory with displeasure. Peeking around the corner, he thought it was rebel leader Maximos, recommended level 155. And the Mons are manageable even at level 150 as their health is low enough to hunt. Frowning his brows, he thought that the boss had a recommended level of 155 and had a huge amount of health, so he had better be careful until his level rose enough. A knight in dark armor, noticing him, asked who he was. Turning around, the main character took out a small knife. The knight swung his sword. Yak threw a knife at his head, causing him critical damage. Breathing heavily, he thought that he should kill them quietly, without drawing attention to himself. Hitting the knight in the back with his sword, he dealt him critical damage. He thought that the damage was critical as expected. Wrapping a red thread around the knight's neck, he hung him on a tree branch and thought that stealth killing would add critical damage. Maximos sighed and said that he was very bored. Raising his palm, he shouted to bring him alcohol and meat. In response, he received nothing but silence. Standing among the tents, he loudly asked what was happening and where everyone was. Putting the sword on his shoulder, he fell silent. He gripped the hilt of his sword forcefully. Turning around, Maximos waved his sword and asked who it was. Blue energy hit one of the tents. The main character covered his face with his palm from a strong gust of wind. He stood firmly on the ground, leaning on his sword, shrouded in blue energy. Maximos, wearing a horned helmet, asked who he was. He shouted to him to reveal his identity. Cursing, Yak said he was trying to leave quietly without causing any trouble. He added that he felt that this NPC had too much time on his hands. Raising his sword, Maximos said that, judging by the cape, he must be a mercenary of the Royal Knights of Didnt Castle. Taking a fighting stance, the main character thought why he asked if he already knew this. He thought that since it had come to this, it was time to fight. Raising his sword, he thought that there was a big difference in levels between them, and he had a huge amount of health. But there were no other mobs here, so if he learned the patterns and dodge well, there's a chance of winning. With a determined frown, he said that if things didn't go according to plan, he would just run away, because he wouldn't be chasing him. Maximos jumped into attack and Yak blocked his attack with his sword. The blades clanked against each other, and he thought the difference was enormous. They swung their swords again. The main character clenched his teeth. Maximos kicked him hard in the chest. Yak flew to the side, scattering stones upon impact. Blood sprayed from his mouth, wide open in pain. Shrouded in purple energy, Maximos in front of him swung his blade again. The aura around him was ominous. The knights, seeing the explosion of purple energy, exclaimed that this is the command center and this is Maximos' attack. Starting to flee, they ordered the command center and upper mountain chalet to be surrounded and archers deployed. The main character bent his knees, standing among the rubble and clouds of dust. Maximos said that there was a truck full of dead players in front of him. He questioned how they dared to attack him without even reaching level 140. Wiping his face, Yak said that it seemed like he had underestimated them. A discharge of red energy flashed. Dark's small feet appeared on the ground. The main character opened his eyes in amazement. The dialogue box says, "The special ability of finding and saving the owner is activated." Dark stood with his back to him, shrouded in a red aura, armed with a shield. The main character asked in amazement what this time. The knights walked quickly in an even formation through the trees. They took up positions armed with bows. Having surrounded Yak, they pulled the string of their bows. Dark turned around and looked at the main character. The eye socket of the skull on his head flashed red. The shield was enveloped in a strong whirlwind of red energy. The main character frowned. Dark stood confidently in a fighting stance. Maximos looked at him blankly, tilting his head to the side. Looking at him like an adult wolf at a puppy, he asked what this cute pet was. Yak told him to try to do something now that the skill was activated. Dark looked at the knight in front of him. Maximos exclaimed irritably that this inverted pet was provoking him. The main character asked in amazement about the provocation. Leaping into the attack, Maximos shouted to him to die. Yak thought in shock what kind of situation this was. There was a flash of red and blue energy. Maximos struck the red barrier surrounding Dark with his sword. A purple flash flashed into Dark's face. His feet skidded along the ground, scattering small stones. Enveloped in purple energy, Maximos swung his sword. He exclaimed that he blocked his attack. Yak asked in shock that he was able to block this attack with this shield. Raising his sword, Maximos said that they would see how long he could continue. He struck with his blade. There was a huge explosion, and the main character asked if he was playing the role of a tank. Pushing off the ground, he jumped forward. Swinging his sword, he thought that he could not show him his back. He thought it was a backshot critical attack. Yak hit Maximos in the back with his sword. There was an explosion and he landed and moved his hands behind his back. He praised Dark for doing a good job. Dark, shrouded in red energy, made a satisfied sound. A hand emerged from the stones, wrapped in steel armor. Rising to his feet, Maximos said that this must be a joke. Quickly jumping into the attack, he shouted that this time he would end it. Cursing, the main character put his sword forward and said that it should have been a backshot critical. Maximos was rapidly approaching him, swinging his sword. Dark put his shield forward. Jumping between them, he blocked the enemy's attack with his magical barrier. Running past it, Yak thought it was good. Moving behind Maximos, he jumped into the attack and swung his sword. His eyes flashed red. He hit Maximos in the back again with his sword. Maximos turned around, red light blazing from his eyes under his helmet. He swung his sword, and the main character dodged, ducking. He furrowed his brows, shrouded in a red aura. Having lunged with his blade, he said that this was the last one. His sword pierced Maximos' chest. Yak opened his mouth wide. Maximos, crumbling into blue pixels, said that he really was a fool. In front of the main character in Dark there was a whirlwind of blue energy. A chest appeared from the vortex, and he exclaimed that this was a reward. One of the knights ordered the others to shoot. Holding the chest in his hands, the protagonist cursed when he discovered an approaching stream of arrows. Dark placed the shield on the ground. A huge magical shield appeared in front of him, blocking them from the arrows. The arrows, shrouded in blue energy, hit the barrier. The protagonist exclaimed that although they made several attacks, their defense was very strong. Dark turned around with wide eyes. Yak nodded and said that he would go first. He began to quickly run away, his mouth wide open. The lamp was surrounded by moths. Dark winked with a pleased look, placing his elbow on the chest. Looking at him while sitting on the bed, the main character thought that it looked like he might be more useful than he expected. Patting him on the head, he praised him for a good job. Sitting on the ground behind him, he said that he had no idea that he could block Maximos' attack like that. Yak lifted the lid of the chest. He happily exclaimed that loot was great too. Dragon armor. It is rumored to be made from the scales of a dragon. The scales covering armor the most powerful defense. Options. All stats plus 40, physical attack power plus 10%, nullification of magic below 4th circle of fire type, HP recovery speed plus 100%, MP recovery speed plus 60%. Skill Dragon's Roar usable once a day. Only available for 3rd job advancement or higher. Burning Orb, a magical bomb said to be created by the Archmage Merlin. It turns an area into a scorched field when used. Its firepower makes it a strategic weapon. Attack power indeterminate. Badge of Rebel General Maximos. Proof of being a rebel general. The main character exclaimed joyfully that he had received several profitable items. Looking at the chest, he said that he just couldn't put on dragon armor right now, but he felt like he would be able to soon. Rubbing his chin, he said that getting the burning orb was good and he hit the jackpot. The moon was shining in the sky above the rocks, and he said that now it seemed that they had completed the kingdom quest, and it was time for them to return. Frowning, Yak asked in confusion if the quest was completed. The knight looked back at him silently. Looking at the knight from different angles, the main character wondered why he didn't answer and whether it was a bug. Suddenly the knight raised his palm, and Yak became afraid. The knight said that he had done well on the quest. Hugging him, he raised his badge and exclaimed that he was able to meet such talent here, and his judgment did not fail him. The main character was hurt by the knight's steel armor. After releasing him, the knight said that he would like to continue suppressing the rebels with him, but wasting such talent here would not be loyal to the kingdom. The main character began to leave, and the knight, waving his handkerchief at him goodbye, told him to take this Maximos badge and go to the kingdom administration office. He said that there he would receive a reward worthy of his efforts. Yak wondered if he shouldn't have been given a reward here. The city was bustling with life. Someone standing in front of the table asked if this was the only reward. Someone else demanded that the GM come out. They shouted that the guards suddenly started fighting. The main character, passing by them, said that it is always noisy here, like in a government office. He turned to the table in front of which the two adventurers stood. Looking out from behind them, he wondered if they gave a lot of rewards, because then the price of the looted items would fall. Nearby was a woman in a black hood who folded her arms across her chest. Squinting, Yak wondered why this woman was looking at him all this time. He thought she looked like a player. The man, slamming his hands on the table, shouted that he could not give out awards for such things. He chased away the frightened adventurer. Looking at him, the main character asked in amazement if he wasn't just giving out awards. On the other side of the table stood a tall man with red hair and a beard. He hurried the main character. Yak said that he cleared the rebel stronghold. The man told him to get his badge. The main character put it on the table. The man exclaimed joyfully that he had brought Maximo's badge. Patting the guy with glasses on the head, he said that he would only give out rewards for such a badge. He asked if he knew what he needed to do. The guy said yes. Yak mentally told him not to arrange work training in front of him. Smiling awkwardly, he asked if this was enough to complete it. The man, giving a thumbs up, said, of course. Many blue dialogue boxes surrounded the main character. You received a reward of 5,000 gold as a bounty. Your royal merit increased by 2,000. You obtained the title Rebel Slayer. Granted access to the office of Royal First Knight Commander Didnt. Title confirmed, Rebel Slayer. A title that can be obtained when you deal with the rebels in their territory. Options: attack power plus 20. Earn the trust of the royal palace. 10% discount when using the shops affiliated with the top of the royal family. Didnt introduced with a big smile and said that he had commendable potential. He told him to come back when he was a little older and he would give him an important mission. Turning around, the main character said that he understood. The dialogue box says, Didnt's interest. Royal First Knight Commander Didnt has taken an interest in the news that individuals who have eliminated the rebel leadership, which they couldn't do, have appeared. He may entrust them with an important task in the future. Quest activation condition: complete the third job advancement and find Didnt. Looking at the dialogue box, the main character asked if the third job advancement was at level 150. He said that it looked like he would have to work hard until then. The woman approached the table and Didnt exclaimed that she had brought Maximo's badge. Turning around, Yak wondered in amazement who else had gotten it. Looking at the woman, he thought, that person too. Didnt and the guy with glasses exchanged the same set of lines again. Smirking, the main character thought that if he party hunted with these players, he could advance to the next profession faster. Sitting next to the exit, he said that this man had not come out for a long time. The woman soon left the building. Yak approached her with a smile and said that it looked like she had defeated Maximos. Extending his hand to her, he asked if she received the same job quest. How about joining a team? The woman silently turned her head towards him. Without answering, she continued walking. The main character asked in confusion if he had really been rejected. He asked in shock if she thought he was trying to flirt with her. He said that even though he was a guy, that's not what he meant. The sun was shining over the city, and Yak, sighing, said that he did not know. He said that he would sleep and start hunting tomorrow. The level recommended for the Dark Land is 120 to 150, a hunting ground where the sun never sets. The shapeless black figure hissed, baring its sharp teeth. Although the recommended level is 120, in reality, even a level 150 user would struggle. On the dry ground stood a stone figure of a man leaning on a sword. If a player got cornered, he would be helpless and die in this land. The main character, walking through the location, said that for his level it could be dangerous here. Putting his palm to his forehead, he looked into the distance and said that he had nowhere else to gain experience. Dark repeated every action after him. Clenching his hand into a fist, Yak said that he must quickly complete the third job advancement and receive the kingdom's missions. Turning to Dark, he asked if he understood what he was saying. Dark looked back at him in confusion, and the main character, sighing, told him to forget about it. He told him to make sure that he attracted the attention of his opponents, as he did in the battle against Maximos, which caused them to explode with backshot critical. Closing his eyes, Yak said that dealing with the dark spirits would be difficult at first. Dark, without listening to him, jumped out of his hands. Shrouded in red energy, it flew through the air above the stone figures. The main character exclaimed furiously. He said that the bandit statues would be as strong as Maximos. The eyes of one of the statues glowed red. Yak upsetly said that, in any case, they have problems and nothing can be done. The stone statues approached them, raising their weapons. They charged, slamming their swords into the red magical barrier. One of the statues swung its sword high. Hitting the magical barriers created bright sparks. Dark closed his eyes. There was a loud explosion, and the main character ran to the attack screaming. The statue's sword was covered in small cracks. The monster hit the magic dome. Cursing, Yak clenched his teeth and swung his sword. Hitting with his blade, he smashed the statues into stone pieces. His hair fluttered gracefully as he moved. Exhaling tiredly and turning pale, he thought that this was his 7th day on this earth. Leaning on his sword, he thought that he was fighting them in the scorching heat. Falling to the ground, he exclaimed that it was so difficult that he was going to die. The main character thought that while his level increased by 2, Dark was able to rise to level 30. Gritting his teeth in dissatisfaction, he thought that he would really like to take a short break now. He thought that every time Dark sees a mob, he goes crazy. Dark ran away hastily, and was pursued by a crowd of dark creatures flying through the air. Raising his sword, Yak thought that even the Egyptian workers who built the pyramids were taking a break. Getting into a fighting stance, he thought that it looked like he wouldn't be able to properly level up this time. The main character's health dropped to almost 0, and he said that it was close. He drank the potion and his health began to recover. He thought that their coordination was much better than he thought. Looking at Dark, who raised his shield above him, he thought that since Dark doesn't aggro, he could continue to use backshot criticals until they died. Noticing something, he opened his eyes wide. The red dialogue boxes say, "You have a heat stroke. You will remain in an abnormal state for 6 hours. All physical abilities will be reduced by 30% as a penalty. If you don't take a rest, the penalty and its duration will increase." Looking around, the main character asked, although it is a little dangerous, if they should set up camp somewhere here. Soon a fire was burning on the ground. The main character pulled his shirt away from him, trying to somehow freshen up. He said that although it is incredibly hot here right now, the effect of the fire is greater. Bonfire's blessing effect has been activated, slowly recovering. Abnormal status effects will be sequentially released. Yak shouted that if they had taken it easy from the beginning, they would not have to camp in such a place. Looking at the dialogue box, he said that since their current location was here, they had gone quite far from the borders of the Dark Land. Smirking, he said that since they had come this far, they needed to defeat the boss. The boss was a huge red monster with horns and demonic wings. The main character said that the recommended level is around 170, but with Dark on his side he might have a chance to defeat him. He added that if they beat him, they would gain a lot of experience. The main character was wearing a VR headset in real life. Sitting in a capsule, surrounded by dialogue boxes, he decided to search for Dark Land in the community. He said that the last reported location by other users is over there. Yonwoo thoughtfully said that even if they walked from here, it would take them approximately 3 days. Rubbing his chin, he said that the other spawn patterns seemed to be random. He asked if there was something else they needed to watch out for. Since a recent patch, a hidden boss called the Shrine of the Ascendant has been appearing in the Dark Land, and it's an incredibly tough opponent that even a raid party can't defeat. The main character asked if this is not at the raid level. He said that it was rumored to be twice as big as other bosses. Looking at the dialogue box, he said that there is no mention of Shrine of the Ascendant on the official website. Shaking his head as he sat in front of the fire, he said that he didn't know, and if they were unlucky, they might run into it in that wide field. Dark lovingly rushed to the sky, and Yak, turning around, said that he was heavy. Dark pressed his red-hot skull against him. The main character jumped up and screamed in pain. Touching Dark's head, he said that his whole body was like a ball of fire. He asked if he had absorbed the hot air and heat inside his body. Flames surrounded Dark's body. The main character said that it looks impressive, although it is not as warm as a fire. Monsters began to appear on the gloomy land. A huge red paw stepped on the ground. A huge red horned monster stood in front of their camp. The main character told Dark that he does not need to return to the inventory, and he needs to rest, because he gets angry when he gets into the inventory. He lay in the tent, looking at the dialogue box, and thought that when mobs spawned, it would show up on the minimap. Slowly closing his eyes, he thought that he would wait for the heat stroke effect to pass, looking at the map. The huge red monster let out a menacing roar. Yak and Dark were sleeping peacefully in bed. The main character's eyes were slightly open in sleep. Waking up, he scratched the back of his head and exclaimed that he had accidentally fallen asleep. Looking out of the tent, he said that it was quiet here. He asked if cooldown takes that long. A system warning appeared in front of him, and he frowned and opened his mouth in shock. The giant monster standing in front of him was transparent and surrounded by system warnings. Looking around, he asked what it was and if the boss had appeared. He started shaking the sleeping Dark to wake him up. Grabbing him in his arms, the main character said that he needed him to defeat the boss. Dark made ridiculous noises while shaking, just waking up. The monster stomped its huge foot on the ground behind them and they staggered. Frowning, the main character turned around sharply. Raising his foot, the monster struck the ground powerfully again. Yak asked if he had a stealth skill. The giant red monster towered over him, raising its leg in the air. Dark jumped from his hands towards the monster. The main character shouted to him that now the right decision would be to run away. He opened his mouth wide in amazement. Dark, surrounded by a red magical barrier, moved towards the monster's leg. He said he couldn't even escape. The monster opened its mouth wide, lined with sharp teeth. Dark's eyes expressed that he was determined. The monster hit the ground and a bright flash flashed. The main character, shrouded in a red aura, ran to attack the boss, holding a sword in his hand. Frowning, he said that he didn't understand. He pushed off the ground with his feet. Yak began to jump up the monster's body. Once above the boss's head, he swung his sword, enveloped in a whirlwind of red energy. He held the hilt of the sword tightly with both hands. He hit the monster hard on the head with his sword. The boss raised his hand to the side of the main character. Yak, gritting his teeth, turned his head. Jumping, he did a somersault in the air, and the monster hit himself in the face with a huge paw. Nervous sweat flowed down the protagonist's face. Pushing off from the monster's hand, he landed on the ground opposite him. Smirking, he looked at his opponent. Red energy flashed beneath his bent legs. He jumped high in one bound, enveloped in red energy. Yak swung his sword over the monster's head. Eyes wide, he turned around. The magical barrier surrounding Dark, becoming increasingly cracked, began to crumble into fragments. The monster waved its paw and threw the main character aside. He dropped the sword and it spun in the air. Blood sprayed from the main character's mouth. He fell to the ground, and the impact raised a cloud of dust above the ground. Leaving a dent in the ground, Yak gritted his teeth in pain. Turning in his direction, Dark opened his eyes wide and extended his hand. His barrier finally gave in and the monster kicked the ground. The dialogue box says, "Gigant's Dark has died. His experience points have decreased." The main character opened his eyes wide. The monster approached him with long strides, and he, cursing, said that he could not cope with this alone, because he killed Dark with one blow. A red orb appeared in his hand and he said he was wondering if it would work. He raised his palm forward. Forcefully thrusting his palm forward, Yak shouted, "Take this." Huge tongues of flame enveloped the boss. Several more red spheres appeared in the protagonist's hands, and he exclaimed that they were causing him damage. He shot a stream of flame at the monster, and it covered its face with its hands. He opened his mouth wide, surrounded by fire. There was an explosion, and Yak, running away, said that now was the time to retreat. The flames around the monster dissipated and it spread its red wings. Red energy swirled around him. Turbulent currents of air swirled around him, and he dropped to one knee. Scattering stones around, he rose into the air. The main character turned around, his mouth wide open. The monster's impact raised a huge cloud of dust, and the protagonist's scream was heard. The dialogue boxes say, "You are dead. Your level has decreased. You have been forcefully logged out. You cannot log in within 24 hours as a penalty for death." After removing the VR headset from his eyes, Yonwoo said that it was annoying. He wearily said that he should have just secretly escaped, but Dark aggroed him. After getting out of the game capsule, he said that he did not understand whether it was real treasure or just trash. Looking at his watch, he said that it was time for dinner because he had not eaten anything all day. He decided to order chicken. Sitting next to the bed, he said that at least he made some money. The news anchors were talking on TV, and on the table in front of the main character were chicken wings and several cans of beer. Opening one of the cans, he drank its contents. He exclaimed joyfully that this was the same taste. The girl on TV asked about the new pet added to Legend World causing a fuss. The man said yes, because before it was just a rumor, but it was officially announced by the Legend World GM today at 2 p.m. He said the new pet has no state restrictions, so it has significant value as users can raise it to be as strong as they want. The girl asked how they could get it. The main character with a chicken bone in his teeth turned his attention to the TV screen. The man said that they could get it through specific quests or in the field, and according to the GM's explanation, they set it up so that no more than 10 people on the server could get it. The girl said in amazement that then this was a really rare pet. The man said that it costs about 1.5 billion won. The girl asked if it had already been released to the market. The man said, placing his palm on the table, that 10 pets had already been released into the field, and one of them was received by one user. The girl exclaimed that now there are 9 of them left in Legend World. There were empty jars and dice on the table. Yeonwoo said that this is a way to attract new or returning users, and it is a fairly predictable strategy. The man said that this was true, and since pets cannot be traded once received, there won't be any listings either. The main character reached for another can. The girl asked what the name of this pet was. Giving a thumbs up, the man said the pet's name was Gigant's Dark. The main character spat out his beer in surprise. The man said that it is equipped with the most advanced artificial intelligence, so it can make its decisions and actively respond. The girl exclaimed in amazement. Yeonwoo thought in shock that this garbage was worth 1.5 billion. Above the multi-story residential building in which his apartment is located, his amazed voice was heard, asking what this meant. Clutching his head, he asked about allowing garbage worth 1.5 billion won to die. He then said that it would surely be revived in any case. He asked if there was any point at all in the fact that garbage costs 1.5 billion. The man in the TV studio said that it was officially announced by the GM today, so he hopes that many people will defy fate and try to get their hands on Gigant's Dark. The girl asked those who received Gigant's Dark to write to the email listed below. The table said, deposit 10 million won. Broadcast, one time, minimum 6 hours, 1 million won per broadcast. Obligatory broadcast, at least once a week. The presenters said that their broadcasting station will support personal broadcasts of Gigant's Dark users. The main character began to count the money from the information in the table, arriving at 4 million per month. Leaning towards the blue screen, he asked that he could earn even more because he plays every day. The girl was asked to move on to the next topic. The man said, recently, there has been a public opinion to use the gold in Legend World as a usable coin in reality. With his mouth wide open, Yeonwoo asked if this is just about making a living. Thinking of Dark holding up 2 fingers, he said that he had no idea it was a treasure, although he couldn't sell it. Water, glowing with a blue light, poured from the stone statue's jug onto the ground. The main character, shrouded in a blue aura, closed his eyes in concentration. He slowly raised his eyelids. Looking around, he said that he died and was already resurrected, and it looks like this is the resurrection area. In Legend World, there is an elder master called Sakazuna. The stone statue was shrouded in a yellow aura. Sakazuna is the master of life, and it is said that when a life dies, she guides them to the afterlife. Therefore, souls that are not guided to the afterlife are resurrected. So, the characters of the users playing Legend World are set to resurrect in front of this master statue. The main character was stretching, standing under a cloudy sky with a red moon. There won't be any GMs sending the user's character to the afterlife, that's why they are resurrected like this. Yak told Dark that he should also leave. Dark with wet eyes and a bandage on his head appeared in front of him. The main character removed the bandage from him. Frowning, he asked what they said was worth 1.5 billion. He closed his eyes and shook his head, saying that he didn't understand it. The statue annoyedly told them to stop doing nonsense and go, because they had already been resurrected. Yak remembered the huge monster slamming its hand onto the ground. Sighing, he said that he would decide on the broadcast appearance later, and now he needed to get out of here. He added that he doesn't want to run into this guy again. Turning around, he said that it looked like the road back would be quite long. Pointing his finger at something, Dark screamed and pulled his pant leg. Yak, turning around, asked what happened. Dark shouted irritably, closing his eyes. He started to run, and the main character, after giving chase, asked where he was going. He shouted that he needed to go to Didnt Castle. They continued to run across the dead ground, kicking up dust into the air behind them. After a while, Yak slowed down. There was a large cave in front of them and he asked why he had brought him here. He asked what he would do if they found themselves in front of the statue again. The main character said that this cave is not even marked on the map. Rubbing his chin, he asked if they could go inside. Dark ran inside the cave, and Yak, confused, extended his hand forward and asked where he was going. Placing his hand on his face, he sighed heavily and repeated again that he was worth 1.5 billion. He slowly began to enter the cave, telling himself to be patient. He walked down the stone steps, holding a torch in his hand. The main character said that it felt like it would be a very long time. Seeing Dark standing next to the door, he asked what was going on. He opened his mouth in shock. The system reported that he had opened a new location, Reborn's grave. Standing in front of the large door, Yak said that he thought he had heard this name somewhere before. Closing his eyes, he tried to look for this name on the internet. Reborn, the demon king who appears in the mythology of the game Legend World. Reborn is a creature from the underworld who gained power and became a demon king, extending his power to the human world, making himself an immortal being. According to the myth, he removed the horns of the previous demon king known as the Stone Demon King and took his place. However, it is said that a hero from the human world appeared and defeated and sealed him. And it is said that the horns, which are the source of his power, are hidden somewhere in the human world. The main character exclaimed that he vaguely remembered the NPCs mentioning this. He asked Dark, who was jumping on the spot, that it seemed like his ability to detect ancient ruins or treasures was a basic function. Touching the door with his hand, he suggested that we go inside and check. Under the darkening evening sky stood a multi-story building with glass windows. On the door it says, Legend World Game Broadcasting Studio. SOG, where your imagination becomes a reality. A girl with long dark hair, dressed in a white dress with long sleeves, stretched tiredly in a chair. Looking at her watch, she said that it was high time to go home. She asked director Lee Myung-guk why he was calling from GM Dark, the owner of K-Game Test. Myung-guk scratched the back of his head, smiled awkwardly and said that they had not contacted him yet. The girl, frowning, said that they had already announced the payment during the broadcast. She asked if there hasn't been any news yet, does that mean the game has been shut down? Myung-guk raised his palms to his chest and asked since GM side already said that someone already has it, wouldn't they contact them even if it's so late after seeing the broadcast? They remembered the TV program and the table that was shown there. The girl, rubbing her chin, asked what if they were waiting. And at that moment someone took it from under their noses. Myung-guk sighed sadly. The girl, twirling her hair with her fingers, told him to go home today and contact Legend World tomorrow to request the user information for K-Game Test Dark again. She told him to also contact the heads of the major guilds. Myung-guk obeyed. The clock hung above the door and they said that they would see each other tomorrow. Leaning back in her chair, the girl exhaled tiredly and said that she also needed to go home and log in. She pressed buttons on a computer mouse. Resting her face on her palm, she asked when she could put aside time to go on vacation. Looking at the Legend World website, she sighed again and said that she couldn't stop thinking about the game even though she wasn't addicted. Looking at her character's profile on the screen, she asked if she should log into the game and try to find the Dark user herself. Her characters were an assassin girl named Harin, dressed in a black hood. The stone doors to the dungeon swung open. The main character opened his mouth in amazement. In front of them was a spacious empty room, in which a red horn stood on a pedestal. He asked in amazement that it was Horn of the Stone Demon. Dark quickly ran towards the red horn. Yak shouted to him to be careful and not to run around in such a place. The shadow under Dark's foot fell on one of the stone saws. He took a step, and the stone slab fell down with a characteristic sound. Arrows shot out of holes in the wall. A huge blade attached to a chain began to swing from side to side. The floor under Dark's feet began to become covered in flames. With his arms outstretched, he blocked all the traps with a magical barrier. Frowning, Yak said that, of course, there are traps here, because Reborn is not a fool. He opened his eyes in amazement. Dark stood proudly, straightening his back, with a shield in his hand. There was a large crater under his feet, and the stone floor around it was destroyed. The main character said that he triggered the aggro from all traps. He said he was very strong. Walking carefully along the stone floor, he said that he needed to be careful because there could still be traps here. He stepped on one of the stone slabs. Nothing happened, and he exhaled with great relief. Dark exclaimed joyfully. Yak exclaimed enthusiastically, placing his hand on his red mouth. Closing his eyes, he said that it has such strong magical power that it would be compatible with any role, be it DPS, tank or healer, no matter what weapon they use. He added that it is made from incredibly expensive, high-quality materials. Rubbing his chin with a smile, he said that he had never seen anyone use equipment made from these materials. whether in a game or on a broadcast. Repeating after him, Dark rubbed his chin in confusion. Raising the horn from its pedestal, the protagonist said that he hoped there were no traps here either. Having successfully raised his horn, he joyfully announced that there were no traps here. Turning to Dark, he told the system to put it in inventory. Smiling, he suggested getting out of here as quickly as possible. A dialog box appeared in front of him. The system reported that the weight and size of the item exceeded the limit, and therefore the item could not be placed in inventory. Yak exclaimed in shock. The wind blew over the dead soil, and he asked if they meant to say that he needed to carry this heavy thing with his hands back through the dark shadowlands. He added that it would be better if there were traps here. He carried the horn, placing it on a piece of cloth. From fatigue, the main character was breathing heavily and loudly. He walked forward with heavy steps, holding the cloth over his shoulder. Dark happily walked ahead of him, and Yak angrily asked how he could sing in such a situation. His steps slowed down more and more. Finally, he let go of the fabric and staggered. Falling to the ground, he waved his palm at his face and said that he was about to run out of stamina and would not do this anymore. Turning around, he asked why he couldn't put the thing in his inventory since it was still an item. Dark grabbed the horn from below with his hands. He lifted the huge object above his head with a satisfied look. The main character angrily asked what he could have been carrying it all this time. Dark began to quickly run with the horn in his hands. Soon his hands began to tremble and shake. He fell face down on the ground, dropping his horn. Covering his face with his palm, Yak sighed and said that, as he thought, it was too heavy. Looking at the horizon, he said that they couldn't continue like this, especially when they didn't know if Demon God's statue would appear again. He added that other enemies might ambush them. He heard a crash from behind. The main character turned towards the sound. He saw a guy with round glasses carrying a cart in front of him. Exclaiming that it was a player, he said that he was just in time. Raising his hands, he called out to him and asked if he had a minute. The guy looked at him in amazement. Scratching his head, Yak asked where he was going. The guy said that he was going to Didnt to sell goods from Shiro. Smiling awkwardly, the protagonist asked if there was a chance that he could load his item into his cart as well. He pointed his thumb at the red horn lying on the ground and asked if he could help him carry it to the warehouse keeper of Didnt Castle. The guy looked at the object through a magnifying glass. Placing his palm on the horn in amazement, he asked if this was not the Stone Demon King's horn. Scratching his head, Yak asked him not to leave the game and not to attack him when he put it in the cart. The guy looked at him and said that he shouldn't ask for help in the first place if he was worried about such things. The main character said in confusion that he would pay him in gold. The guy told him that everything was fine and he had been playing as a merchant since he got bored when he maxed out his level. Pointing his finger at the cart, he told them to place their item there. Yak thanked him happily. Noticing Dark, the guy asked if it was Gigant's Dark. The main character said yes. Running up to him, the guy said that this was the first time he had seen him in person. Looking at it with shining eyes, he said that he really wanted to buy it, but he could not exchange it. Smiling awkwardly, Yak said that it was an heirloom pet. He thought irritably that if he could, this guy would probably steal it from him. He thought that even a max-level player wanted him. While going through his things looking for something, the guy said that this little guy was very cute, and he wanted to give him something. Dark had a black shield in his hands, and the guy said that it was a black round shield that suited him perfectly. Raising his fists in the air, he said that the physical and magical defense characteristics would be much better than with the shield he was using. Dark happily jumped on the spot. Looking at them, the main character said that he was jealous. He added that max-level players are quite generous. They started walking forward and the guy said that he knows a road where there will be no mobs, so they need to follow the cart and not get distracted. The main character agreed. The calls of owls could be heard and the full moon was shining in the sky. They ended up in the city. The guy lowered the cart to the ground. Bowing, Yak thanked him. The guy told him not to worry about it, because helping a beginner is the duty of a professional player. The main character asked in amazement that he was a newbie. Tilting his head, he said that he was almost at level 140. The guy said with a smile that he was leaving and said goodbye to Dark. He said goodbye in return. The main character stood with a horn in his hands in front of a strong, short man with a large beard. The man asked what he wanted to store an item. Yak answered yes, and he wants to store this. Waving his hand, the man said that they could store something like that in their warehouse. The main character asked why in frustration. The man said that the magical energy was too strong and it might damage the things of their other customers if they kept it here. Yak exclaimed in amazement. Leaning forward, he asked if he could make an exception. The man lightly pushed the horn away with his hand and said no, it couldn't damage other things simply because of its item. The main character began to beg him with tears in his eyes and said that he could not do anything about it right now. The man sternly replied that it was his problem. He asked why he couldn't just take no for an answer. Pointing his finger at the people in red clothes, he said that if he persisted, he would call the guards. The guards looked at him aggressively, ready to punish him for breaking the law. Sighing, the main character said that this thing was really giving him problems. He said he couldn't just throw away such high-quality materials. Someone pointed a finger at them and asked if they were Gigant's dark. Passers-by around began to discuss the fact that it was really him. Looking at the horn, Yak said that he had better take it to Fance right away and ask him to make equipment from it. There is no other way out. He came to his forge, and Fance asked where he found it. Placing his hand on the horn, he said that he could not believe that he had brought something so valuable all the way here. The main character threw up his hands and said that he had no choice because it did not fit in his inventory, and the warehouse refused to accept it. He said that he was barely able to bring it to the castle with the help of a good-natured max-level player. Fance put his hand to his face thoughtfully and said that he didn't know who the player was, but they weren't being kind. They just knew there was no point in having the item. The main character asked confused what he meant. Looking at the horn lying on the table, Fance said that this thing breaks the wrists of every blacksmith who tries to work with it, and it is a very unpleasant object. Getting up from his seat, he said that this player initially knew that dealing with this would be problematic, so he did not want it. Yak exclaimed, "That's why he said that." Turning to the stove, Fance said that the same goes for him. He asked why not sell it to him for 1,000,000 gold. The main character exclaimed in amazement that this was 1,000,000 gold, which is 100 million won in the real world. With a hand gesture, Fance said that he was the only one who would pay him so generously, and if he went anywhere else, they wouldn't even give him 100,000 gold. He asked what he thought. Rubbing his chin, the main character asked if the fact that he wanted to buy it for millions of gold meant that it was worth much more than that. Fance laughed and said he thought he was just being a fool. He said he was much smarter than he looked. Stretching out his palm, Yak told him to tell him the truth. He asked how much he could get for it, and if he would pay if he asked for 3,000,000 gold. Fance asked irritably that he really had no idea how nasty the Stone Demon King's horn is. He asked who he was trying to bargain with. The main character threw up his hands and said that then he would simply look for another blacksmith. Fance tearfully asked if he would pay the costs if he made it into gear. Smiling, Yak asked how much it would cost. Fance raised 5 fingers with furrowed brows. The main character said that 500 gold sounds simple enough. Fance shook his head. He showed him 5 fingers again. Yak asked that 50,000 gold is already too much. The blacksmith shook his head again. He raised his 5 fingers even more insistently. The main character exclaimed with displeasure that 500,000 gold is already madness. Fance's patience ran out, and he angrily shouted that it was worth 5,000,000 gold. The main character exclaimed in shock, his mouth wide open. Laughing, Fance said that was just a rough estimate. Stretching out his palm, he asked if he would pay for it.